The polytheistic origin of Yahweh. Judaism is now known for its strict monotheism, but Israel was originally polytheistic. Among their gods were El and Yahweh, who later became two names for the same Jewish God. Clues about their pantheon can be found in the Bible and also among clay tablets from the ancient city Ugarit from between 1500 and 1300 BC. And these tablets predate the first historical mention of Israel on the Merneptah stele of 1208 BC. On these tablets we meet the same god named El, who is now described as the head of a large family of gods. Baal, who the Bible later attacked as a false god, was also part of this family, and El even had a wife named Asherah. The god Yahweh does not appear in the Ugaritic texts. Instead, the Bible describes him as coming from the south, possibly referring to the Midianites, among whom Moses sheltered when he was hiding from the Egyptian authorities. Fragments of these polytheistic beliefs can also be found in the Bible itself, in some archaic passages that have escaped later redaction. For instance, we read in a psalm that God presided in a great assembly, rendering judgment among the gods. So, we have a lot to get to. Let's now examine the evidence. Hey, good to see you. This is Stefan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence, and enlightenment. You'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface-level understanding you get on other channels. So, go check it out for yourself. Let's start. In the 2nd century BC, Canaan, in modern-day Israel, was inhabited by various tribes, each with its own patron god. These gods belonged to the Canaanite pantheon, which included the gods El, Baal, and the goddess Asherah, which all appear in the Bible. According to the P source of the Bible, written around the 6th century BC, Abraham, the ancestor of the Jews, originally came from Ur in modern-day Iraq, so outside of Canaan. From there he traveled to Haran, which is now on the border between Turkey and Syria, and which was then located in the Semitic region known as Aram. And then finally Abraham settled in Canaan. But strangely, the older sources of the Bible do not mention Ur as the birthplace of Abraham. Instead, the first city they mention was Haran, suggesting that the inclusion of Ur was a later invention. And this would also explain why the direct forefathers of Abraham, namely Serach, Nahor, and Terah, were actually named after villages around Haran. And Abraham's brother is even called Haran. So it is quite possible that the original birthplace was Haran, very close to Canaan. And in fact, both archaeological remains and also linguistic and religious comparisons from around 1200 and 1000 BC confirm that Israel formed within Canaanite culture. There's just too big of an overlap between the Canaanites and the Israelites, often to the point where they are indistinguishable. Yet we do know that Israel did break itself off from the other Canaanites at least by 1208 BC. Because both Canaan and Israel are mentioned as separate entities on a stele of the pharaoh Merneptah. And in this larger text, celebrating Egyptian victories in battle, we read the sentences, "Plundered is the Canaan," and also, "Israel is laid waste." Interestingly, the hieroglyphs used here to denote Canaan signifies that it is a land, while the hieroglyphs for Israel contain an image of a man and a woman, which denotes that it is a people or an ethnic group, which is quite an accurate description. The original god of the tribe of Israel seems to have been El, while that name Yahweh was a later adoption. Even the word Israel means El rules. And by the way, the Bible itself claims that the name Israel means struggle with God, after Jacob's physical encounter with God, but this was a later folk etymology. which appear quite often in the Bible. And also, both source P and E from the Bible call God by the name El from the start, all the way until God reveals himself as Yahweh to Moses. Here we read, "I am Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El or El Shaddai. But by my name Yahweh I did not make myself known to them." And this might be an ancient memory of the adoption of the God Yahweh. Another clue comes from the proper names in Genesis. 17 characters in the text have names compounded with El, such as Bethel, while there are no names that contain Yahweh. While in later books of the Bible, names compounded with Yahweh become common, although the name Yahweh seems to have been pronounced Yahu or Yahoo at the time. For instance, we have Jeremiah or Jeremiah in English, Yesayahu or Isaiah in English, and Jehonatan or Jonathan. Interestingly, Genesis also has one name compounded with Baal, namely Benjamin's son, Ashbal. And this is curious since Baal would later be recognized as a false god by the Israelites. Place names from the 2nd millennium BC also show an absence of Yahweh, until about the turn of the 1st millennium. We do have references from the god Anat, namely Anatoth, Baal in Baal Perazim, Dagon in Beth Dagon, El in Bethel, the god Yarihu, which became Jericho, and Shalimu, which is included in Yerushalim or Jerusalem. And the sun god Shamash is found in Bet Shemesh. And most of these gods were part of the Canaanite pantheon. We know about this pantheon mainly from a number of texts on clay tablets from between 1500 and 1300 BC, found in the city Ugarit in northern Syria. Among these texts we have found the Baal cycle, which describes a myth about the thunder god Baal, literally meaning Lord. In the most memorable part of the Baal cycle, Baal was killed by Mot, the god of death, and then descended into the underworld. Being a weather god, a god of rain, the death of Baal was interpreted as the start of the summer drought season. And we then read that El, the father of Baal and Mot, mourned his death. The goddess Anat, Baal's sister, found his body and buried him, and then went on to kill Mot in order to release Baal from the underworld. The killing of Mot was stated in agricultural terms. We read, "With a sword he splits him, with a sieve he winnows him, with a fire she burns him, with millstones she grinds him, and in a field she sows him," clearly connecting the death of Mot to the harvest. Then we read that El had a dream in which the heavens rained down, which meant that Baal, the god of rain, had resurrected. Anat then found him, and then Baal returned to his throne, in his beautiful palace. In the text from Ugarit, we also read that the high god El was married to the goddess Asherah, who also stars in the Bible, and in some cases we read that Baal was one of their children. Other evidence comes from late 9th century BC potsherds from the Sinai Peninsula. On one of these potsherds we read, "Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah," suggesting that the goddess was here married to Yahweh. And as you can see, there even was an image of the couple associated with this text. Similarly, we have an inscription from the end of the 8th century BC, which states, "Uriyahu the rich has written it, may Uriyahu be blessed by Yahweh, who has saved him from his enemies, through his Asherah." Traces of these past polytheistic beliefs are also found in the Bible itself. Firstly, the name Elohim, containing El, has a plural ending, and therefore can mean both God and gods, depending on the form of the associated verb used. For instance, in Genesis 1 we read, "Then Elohim said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness.'" There are also several passages in which El is described as a leader in a council of gods. For instance, we read, "Who in the skies above can compare with the Lord? Who is like the Lord among the heavenly beings? In the council of the holy ones, El is greatly feared. He is more awesome than all who surround him." And this is found in one of the Psalms. And in another instance we read, "Elohim presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods." And in the Bible we also read that El, here presented as the God of the entire earth, divided up the nations of the world among his sons, giving Israel to his son Yahweh. We read, "When the Most High, or Elyon, allotted the nations for inheritance, when he divided up humanity, he fixed the boundaries for peoples according to the number of divine sons. For Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob his own inheritance." So here El and Yahweh seem to be two separate deities. Interestingly, if you look up this verse in most English translations of the Bible, you read that God gave the nations not to those divine sons, as we've just read, but to the children of Israel. However, the 3rd century BC Greek translation of the Bible, and also the Dead Sea Scrolls, give the translation that I just gave. And it is likely the verse was later altered to avoid the implication of polytheism. In time, however, it came to be believed that El and Yahweh were two names for the same God, and eventually El became a generic name for God, no longer a proper name. El, as we have seen, was part of the Canaanite pantheon, but Yahweh was not. So where did he come from? Again, we can find clues in the Bible. As we've read before, Yahweh first introduced himself to Moses on Mount Horeb, which occurs in Exodus 3. We read, "Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush." So at this time Moses was among the Midianites, but who were they? They were nomads who lived in the deserts south of Israel. And Moses had taken refuge with them after he had killed an Egyptian overseer. Once there, Moses married Zipporah, the daughter of that Midianite priest that we've just encountered, Jethro. It is curious here too that Moses was married to a Midianite, as mixed marriages were later prohibited. And this seems to suggest that that interaction between Moses and the Midianites was not a later addition to the story. Then in Exodus 18, before Moses' encounter with God at Mount Sinai, we meet Jethro again. He comes to visit Moses, quote, "in the wilderness near the mountain of God." And here Jethro performs a sacrifice to Yahweh, a very curious thing to do for a Midianite priest. Strangely, this sacrifice takes place on an altar which is only set up in chapter 24, 6 chapters later and after the revelation at Sinai. And also, Exodus 18 assumes that the Israelites are already at the mountain, while we read of their arrival in the next chapter. So it is likely that Exodus 18 was originally placed later in the story, making Jethro's role even more important. It would be quite something if it was a Midian priest who performed a sacrifice to Yahweh after his great revelation. So perhaps we should take seriously the idea that Moses learned about Yahweh outside of Israel, in the land of the Midianites. But there is more. Some passages in the Bible locate the origin of Yahweh in the same deserts in the south. In the following hard-to-translate verse we read, "The Lord came from Sinai and dawned over them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came from the south, from his mountain slopes." And both Seir and Mount Paran, by the way, are also located in the desert south of Israel. So this gives us a clear indication of where Yahweh came from according to this verse. Mount Sinai itself might also originally be located in this area. Even the Bible itself seems to be confused about its location. And it was only later tradition that placed Mount Sinai in the modern-day Sinai Peninsula. Another similar verse from Judges reads, Yahweh, when you came forth out of Seir, when you advanced from the land of Edom, also south of Israel, the earth trembled, the sky quaked, the clouds poured down water, and the mountains fled before Yahweh, the Sinai, before Yahweh, the God of Israel. And in Habakkuk 3, we read once more that Yahweh came from Mount Paran, and here again we read that the mountains tremble. And this verse also refers to the dwellings of Midian, who we read were in anguish. So here we have a direct connection between Yahweh and the Midianites. And on top of this, we also have a late 9th century BC inscription, which reads, Yahweh of Samaria and Yahweh of the South. So this is starting to turn into a quite coherent story. And this description also matches the Shasu nomads, mentioned in some Egyptian texts, which they also locate south of Israel. And interestingly, the Egyptians also connected these nomads to the term Yahweh. For instance, an inscription from around 1370 BC reads, the country of the Shasu Yahweh, or it can also be translated as Yahweh in the country of the Shasu. And although the evidence for this is not completely conclusive, this could be an Egyptian reference to the god Yahweh. And finally, we'll ask ourselves, what type of god was Yahweh originally? Some old verses depict Yahweh as a typical storm god from the Middle East. Like the storm god Baal, Yahweh is described as a cloud rider. We read, clouds are his chariot, and he also controls the seasons. We read, the voice of Yahweh makes hinds give birth. It strips the leaves of the forests. And Yahweh could also put an end to droughts by making the rain come, as we read in 1 Kings 18. And both Yahweh and Baal were also associated with the bull, and both of them were worshipped in the form of a bull. In the Bible, we read that King Jeroboam, founder of the northern kingdom of Israel, constructed 2 sanctuaries, one at Bethel and one at Dan, within each a statue of Yahweh in the form of a bull. The Bible says about this, King Jeroboam took counsel and had made 2 calves of gold, and said to the people, you have gone up too often to Jerusalem. These are your gods, Israel, who have brought you out of the land of Egypt. And he set up one in Bethel and one in Dan. And then we read, this was a sin. For the southern kingdom of Judah, who produced this text, did not approve of the representation of Yahweh as a bull. Also, both Yahweh and Baal are described as having a victory over a sea god. In the Baal cycle, Baal killed the sea god Yam, literally meaning sea. We read, Yam is dead, and Baal shall be king. And Baal also took on Tanin and Lotan, who were the serpentine servants of Yam. And correspondingly in the Bible we read, it is you who broke the sea with your strength. You smashed the head of the dragon on the waters. It is you who shattered the heads of Leviathan. And sea here is written as Yam, the same name as the Ugaritic sea god. And the dragon is Tanin, his servant. And it is quite likely that Leviathan was Lotan. And that is what we know about the origins of Yahweh. In the next lecture, we'll look close at the development of Yahweh from a tribal and relatable God who walked among men, into an abstract, transcendent God who authoritatively spoke from the heavens. We'll do this by diving deeper into the study of the A, the G, and the P sources mentioned before in this lecture. I hope to see you there. But for now, I hope you were inspired. And if you want to know more about Jewish history or any other topic from world history, then read my book, In Search of the Sublime. You can read it completely for free on worldhistorybook.com or you can buy a physical copy on Amazon. See you next time. Bye bye.